My generation? We've only got one thing on our minds: solving mysteries and building traps. That's two things, Fred. Welcome to another episode of the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo, the podcast where we delve into the mystery of Scooby-Doo media, getting clues from people who helped bring our favorite mystery-solving dog to life on various platforms, and maybe eating some Scooby snacks along the way. I'm your host, Alexa Lawler.
We're just solving mysteries. All the kids are doing it.
No, they're not.
What have you kids done now?
You can call me
Mr. E.
Nibiru.
Welcome to the very first episode in September. This month, we're doing something a little bit different in that each interview corresponds to a theme, which will be Mystery Incorporated. To kick off the month, we have Mitch Watson, who is the producer and head writer for the show. And just for a bit of background context on this one, we did the interview just a few days after supervising producer Tony Cervoni confirmed that Velma was a lesbian in the show, so that sets up a bit of the conversation. Additionally, this is one of the longest episodes yet on the podcast, so I highly recommend curling up to relax while listening to this interview. I also somehow didn't end up doing an intro to this one, so we're kicking off right into the trivia. So if you're up for it, I typically like to start off with a quick 3-question trivia game.
Okay, go for it.
Question 1. What are the names of the two people on the soccer team who are often seen being quite hostile towards Fred and Mystery Incorporated?
Oh, that's god damn it. I know who those are because I was one of those guys. Oh Jesus, it's been too long. It's been I can't remember, but I know exactly who you're talking about. They fall off the mountain at one point.
Yeah.
I can't remember their names. This is terrible. I can't remember their names, but I know who you're talking, because those are voiced by myself and Tony Cervoni.
And that is why I picked that question.
Yes, yeah. But I'm trying to remember their names, and I can't remember their names. I'm sorry.
Ethan and Gary.
Ethan and Gary, right. Ethan and Gary, shit. I can't even remember which one I played. Those characters were also designed slightly to look like Tony and I. So, anyways, thank you. Ethan and Gary. I shall never forget those names again.
Now, the next two are maybe a little bit more obscure.
Oh, God. Like that one wasn't obscure. No, not at all.
So hopefully they're not too hard. But question 2, in The Secret of the Ghost Rig, what was the fake name that Rung Latterton used to buy tires for the ghost truck?
Oh, Jesus Christ. I don't know that. I have no idea. I don't remember that at all. What was it?
G. Nerno Treadle.
Oh, I never would have remembered that in a million years. Excellent. You've stumped me twice. So whatever it was I was going to win, I'm definitely not going to win it. All right. What was number 3?
Number 3 is probably the hardest one.
Oh, good. Great.
In The Grasp of the Gnome, what is the name of the self-help book that Velma's mom gives her after the gnome attacks?
Oh, God, I don't know. You do know it was like 10 years ago that I did this show, and I have no idea. 100% no clue. What was it?
It's called I'm Okay, You're a Scary Gnome.
Yeah, that sounds like something we would have written. Yeah, oh, great. So 0 for 0. Or 0 for 3, I should say. Yeah, well done. Those are truly obscure ones. And you also chose particular episodes of which are never the episodes that anybody ever wants to talk about either. Like the truck one, which I think is the second or third episode we did. and that gnome episode, which was written by John McCann, who gave me my first job. Yeah, no one ever brings those episodes up. By the way, just a little bit of trivia: that whole gnome episode came about because Tony Cervoni, who was my partner on the whole thing, he was so upset that he kept going to the Renaissance Fair and everybody was dressed like a pirate. And he was really angry about that because that was a totally different century and he thought it was just wrong that people were dressing up as pirates. So that was why there's a whole bunch of jokes about that in that episode, but that was the entire reason that we actually did that episode, was that Tony was irate that there were so many pirates showing up at the Renaissance Fair.
I had no idea that was
Anyways.
based on a real problem.
It was, believe it or not. Yeah, many of those episodes are all based on real problems that Tony and I were having at the time. No, that one though in particular was because Tony was, yeah, he was really, he just came back one time. I think he came back from the Renaissance Fair and he was just livid that there were so many pirates walking around, and he's just kind of like, they're not pirates, okay? Pirates didn't exist back then, blah, blah, blah. So we decided to make, and I had an obsession at the time with, there was a video floating around the internet of a gnome, I think in Mexico, or this dwarf in Mexico. It was something in Mexico that kept showing up and terrifying children. And you can still find the videos of it. And that's why it walks, in the show, it walks with like a sideways gait. There is this thing in Mexico, at least back then, that people kept videotaping a tiny person with a big cone hat, like shuffling in the distance. It was really weird. Anyways, yeah, that's how Mystery Incorporated stories were born, from my weird obsessions and Tony's anger at something. All right, now that I failed your test, now that I've magnificently failed your trivia test, what else would you like to talk about?
To start off the general questions, what's your relationship to Scooby-Doo? Did you grow up watching?
Yeah, I mean, it was, the originals were on, I probably watched, because they were on before I was born, so I probably watched reruns. I mean, I remember the original pretty well, and I remember a few iterations of it here and there, but I definitely cannot say that I was like some massive Scooby-Doo fan before I started working on the show, or which is why I ended up working on the show. In fact, I think they probably I think I probably was asked to do it, or one of the reasons they approached me to do it was because I really wasn't like some super fan, so I could look at it from a different angle and maybe come up with something that they hadn't thought of before. Yeah, I was definitely not one of these people that's like, oh my God, everything is canon and you can't do this because they would never do that and blah, blah, blah. And in fact, once the show was done and it aired, there was many people who were diehard Scooby-Doo fans who did not like the show because they felt that it did things that, that went against canon and blah, blah, blah. So whatever. That was my feeling about that was there were so many iterations of Scooby-Doo at that point that there really was no canon. I mean, I guess you could go back to the original and say that was canon or whatnot, but the problem I have with saying something is canon is you sort of box yourself in and you stop yourself from actually exploring new ways of taking the show or the subject matter because you're so hamstrung by rules and stuff that don't even really exist, by the way, that have just sort of been created out in the ether. So I think I think when you take over a franchise like Scooby, it helps to have reverence, but not be so reverent that it keeps you from exploring and trying to do something new with it.
Definitely. And what was it like to come onto a show where the franchise does have those like loyalist fans that are, kind of obsessed with what is and isn't canon?
It was my first experience with that. And then I did, right after Scooby, I did my version of Batman. And I experienced it more on that show than I did on Scooby. On Scooby, we got a lot of, it was really funny. The most pushback we got, I think, in the entire series from the fans on Scooby was all about Velma. It was about how we were portraying Velma. And we had a very specific, to me, and I would always respond if anybody interviewed me, I would always go like, you don't quite see the whole picture of what we're doing with Velma, but when you see the whole picture, I think you're going to appreciate what we were doing. And maybe they did and maybe they didn't, because I never followed up with it. But we got a ton of feedback on Velma for the way that she was acting towards Shaggy, and the fact that we were actually showing them having a relationship, and blah, 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 blah. And then people were saying, oh, I don't like the way Velma was acting towards Shaggy, and da, 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 da. And we just held our tongues because we knew what we were doing, and we knew it was going to pay off somewhere down the line in the second season. But we weren't allowed to talk about it, really, because, we were setting up Velma to be a character who was sort of kind of figuring out her own sexuality and coming to grips with the fact that, that she's gay. And part of that was to show, her reactions to Shaggy and how he wasn't giving her what she felt she needed. And then ultimately she realizes that it's not so much to be about Shaggy, it's more about her. I mean, she was looking in the wrong place. And then we have there's a mermaid episode, and then that's where she really gets the first inkling that, oh, wait a minute, maybe guys are not what I'm looking for. And then we introduced hot dog water, and then by the end of the series, we were hoping that it would be pretty clear that if the show goes on or whatever happens in their lives, that hot dog water and Velma are together, have found each other. And then, so Velma is finally content with who she is. And so we knew that going all the way through, but we sort of had to endure all the attacks because we weren't allowed to talk about it. It was not something there was no way at that time, because this was like I said, 10 years ago or so, they were not going to let's portray Velma as gay, period. So, we had to figure out a different way to do it. And that was how we did it. And some people got it and some people didn't. So anyways, that sort of answers that part of the question. And that was the most pushback we got. Everybody fucking flipped out about Scooby. First off, with Shaggy and Velma making out with the first episode, I think. I remember even the executives, and because the show was originally done for British or European Cartoon Network, not the United States. And I remember they wigged out. They were like, what? They just flipped out that we were doing this. And we're like, well, no, it's going to be fine. And then what happened was the executive that we were dealing with in England he either quit or got fired. We never quite found out what happened. All we knew was that we didn't have an executive on the show anymore. And for those of you unfamiliar with how shows work, every show has at least one or two executives on it. And they're the ones who represent the studio. And so they make sure that you're maintaining, the brand or whatnot. And they give you notes and da-da-da-da-da. Well, without an executive on a show, we could pretty much do whatever we wanted. There was no teacher watching over us. So because that guy, lost his job, I think right around the second episode, we were without an executive for a good 10, 12 episodes. And so we were able to get a lot of stuff in that we normally would not have been able to get in. And then an executive came on the show and stopped a bunch of that. So I remember one of the biggest thing I think that happened when the executive came back on the show was the reintroduction of Scooby snacks in the show, because I'd banned them. I said, I don't want to do it. I don't want this to become a show about a dog eating a bunch of biscuits. I said, let's it'll show up periodically, but I don't want to make this like the whole fucking Scooby snack show, because a lot of the other iterations of the show had been obsessive about Scooby snacks, and they were like, okay, great, but they've done that. Let's dial that back a little bit. And then when the executive came in, he dialed it right back up again. So we battled back and forth of these very, very important life questions of how much Scooby snacks to show in an episode. But anyways, there's that. That's my long-winded answer to whatever it was the question was that I've now completely forgotten.
And coming coming back to talking about what you could or couldn't do with Velma, it's been circling around
Yeah.
on social media lately that Tony had actually confirmed that Velma was a lesbian, and there's still so many people that are like, "What? That wasn't obvious."
Yeah, I know.
But what's your reaction to that?
Well, to me, it's obvious if you actually, I mean, I guess it's obvious if you're looking for it. To us, it was very obvious, especially after the mermaid episode. And then also the final shots of Velma and hot dog water on the bed together at the end. I mean, to us, it was like crystal clear. My response is like, come on, really? I mean, I think now if you did it, uh, it would almost be like, of course, and expected and encouraged, da da da. But 10 years ago, you can't. Even then, you couldn't do that kind of thing. So, a lot of what we did on Mystery Incorporated was we would just go through the blogs and the Reddit posts and anything else to see what fans were saying. And so there were things that ended up in the show that were based on theories that fans had, and which was a lot of fun for us. So we were very well aware of what was going on in terms of how people felt about Velma being gay or not gay or da da da. We just sort of ignored it. I mean, we just kind of ignored it. I think we got a big chuckle out of it because we knew what we were doing, and we were doing it from the very, very start. And once we started doing it, there was no going back, and we were pretty happy with the decisions we'd made. So it was alternately like annoying that no one was sort of getting it, but also very, very fun to see how angry people would get with each other. And I think that's why Tony finally said, "Look, I'm tired. It's been 10 years. God damn it. She's not bi. Okay. She's gay. All right." And so he just wanted to make a very stringent, he wanted to make that point. And then he immediately texted me after he did it. And he said, "Dude, just so you know, Velma is gay is trending on Twitter." I'm like, "What?" "Oh, who let that cat out of the bag?" And he's like, "Well, I posted this thing." I'm like, "All right, cool. Finally." I was wondering when that would finally come out. But anyway, so I think, what was your question? Your question was the fan reaction to all of that. How?
Yeah.
What was my response to it?
Yeah.
I had been at that point. It wasn't not my first rodeo, so I was familiar with fan feedback, and I had sort of built up a bit of a thick skin to it because of the thing about the internet, and the interesting thing about writing especially animation, and the fact that responses are immediate, and they're not showing up in a letter in your mailbox. They're literally showing up seconds after the show. Because I used to watch the show while watching they used to live blog. People would live blog while watching the show, and so I was watching criticisms in real time, and I got a big kick out of it. But it never bugged me, really. I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed it. In fact, the more hostile, the better. I got to a point where I really, really started to like all the anger. I found it very entertaining because I thoroughly believe that if you're going to do anything that even remotely will be remembered in any way, it has to offend somebody. If you do something that's completely that everybody across the board just loves it and thinks it's wonderful, and there's no controversy, that means yes, you've probably created something entertaining, but you didn't create something that sort of pushed the boundaries of whatever you were doing. And until you do that, people are just going to be like, "Yeah, it's great," and then move on. But if you can push their buttons in some way, then they remember you. So I always feel that if you're going to do something, you need to get both. You should have both negative and positive reactions, and that means, all right, great, you did something that caused people to have a particular feeling about it, which means you must have done something right. So, I mean, Mystery Incorporated was a very interesting show for Tony and I because while we were doing it, we had no idea how it was going to be received, and we got a lot of mixed messages from the studio. Warner Brothers was totally behind it, but Cartoon Network never liked the series. They didn't like it at all. And if you, in the second, they kept pulling it off the schedule and putting it in different places, and it became very hard for people to find. And it wasn't until it showed up in its entirety on Netflix that people really started to get behind it. And Tony and I would say it all the time. We were like, yeah, maybe nobody's going to appreciate it now, but 5 years from now, people will appreciate it. And then it actually happened a little quicker than that. But we were, so there was a certain point of working on the show where we were kind of like, all right, we're not getting any support from Cartoon Network. They're not going to promote the show. We've just got to accept the fact that for right now, people just aren't going to ever get to really see it. So, but that's not going to stop us from doing what we wanted to do. With the hopes that somewhere down the line, somebody would finally discover the show and watch it and pay attention. But it was always a bit of a bummer that Cartoon Network just never really got behind it. And they thought it was too dark, and they thought it was too weird. And this, by the way, this is all stuff I heard secondhand. And I was also told that the one other rumor that I heard was that it premiered at around the same time as Adventure Time. And the ratings, this I do know was true, the ratings for Mystery Incorporated were better than the ratings for Adventure Time in the beginning. And then they pulled us off the schedule. Because, and this is, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, there's always been a rivalry, or there was a rivalry between Cartoon Network and WB. Even though they're owned by the same company, they function completely separately. And there was a rival. There was like Cartoon Network wanted to prove that they were the better studio, I think, and Warner Brothers wanted to show that they were the better studios. And so the trouble was that all of Warner Brothers stuff ultimately ended up on Cartoon Network, and we were at the whim of Cartoon Network's programming people. So if they wanted to tank a show, they could tank it. And they pretty much did, in my opinion. They not only in the United States, though. It became a major success for, I think, 2 years running all over the world. And then there was a big backlash where they wanted to know why it was successful everywhere else in the world, but not in the United States. And somebody finally said, well, they pointed out the fact that it had been pulled off the schedule 13 times and moved to different spots. And then nobody was told about it. Cartoon Network also used to do trailers for the show that literally would reveal who the villain was in the episode. They would cut trailers together, and at the end of the trailer, they would do the unmasking. We're like, what are you doing? What? You are actually just giving away the ending of the show. That was at the point we were kind of like, are they sabotaging the show? So I don't know if they were or not. Ultimately, I'm sure they would say they weren't, but it's hard to understand why they would do that and pull the show off the air 13 different times during the course of its run, and with no real explanation why they were doing that. But ultimately, it was, I think, finally they came down to, I think finally everybody came around to the fact that, yeah, there was somebody at the top that just didn't like the show, and they were doing whatever they could to make sure that it didn't succeed. And then it succeeded anyways. So that was very satisfying. But fortunately, like I said, Scooby ended up on Netflix. And when it ended up on Netflix is when it exploded, because everybody could watch the show in continuity. That was the other thing they used to do. They used to put shows on in the wrong order. And it was just really a nightmare. And there was nothing we could do about it because they were the platform we were on at the time. But that was what was great when it came out on Netflix, because then everybody could finally see the show as it was intended to be seen. And the rest is history. There you are.
And what was it like to work on a Scooby show that really pushes the boundaries with having an overarching story and, explorations of sexuality and things like that?
Well, it was great. That was our intention when I was first approached to work on the show by Sam Register. He asked me to do it, and at first I was reticent because I was kind of like, that show's been around for a long time, and I don't know that there's any. I really wasn't interested in just sort of doing another reboot version of the original series. That wasn't. I said they did it in the original series. Everybody loves the original series. The original series is iconic, and I don't want to just rehash it. but Sam was pretty open to, us exploring new ways of doing it. So, I sat down with Tony. Actually, it was Tony and myself, because I think they'd taken a couple of stabs at it already, and nobody has sort of gotten it where they wanted to. So then I met with Tony, and Tony and I didn't know each other, and then we just started sitting down and hashing it out. And his partner Spike Brandt was also involved in the beginning, but then Spike sort of left to go work on I think some Tom and Jerry stuff. But anyway, so then Tony and I just started hashing it out, and we were both of the same belief that if we were going to do this, we were going to do it in the way that we would have liked to have seen the show. And so the first thing we tackled was, strangely enough, was how old are these kids? Because nobody knew. And we would ask people, how old do you think they are? And then people would go, well, some would go, well, they're in college. And then other people would go, well, they're in high school. And then other people would go, well, no, they're in their 20s. They're out of college. And so nobody knew. So we went into the archives. That's one of the nice things about working for a place like Warner Brothers, is they have all of this stuff is archived. So all the original pitch materials from the original show are there, and you can read them all. So we went back to the original material and read and discovered that, they're high school students. And, they all basically live in the same town. And the town, I don't think the town had a name in the original materials. It certainly wasn't Coolsville. But it was like La Jolla. They had described it as a beachside town. So we were like, okay, let's create. So we created the idea of Crystal Cove. And we said, instead of having them driving all over the place so you never know where they live or see their parents, I said, let's set them in a town. Let's give them parents. Let's give them backstories. Let's give them, let's add some dimensions to their characters. Let's give them real personalities. And then we had to figure out, well, what's the deal with this town, though? And Tony and I had been talking about that there were places in the United States that were regarded as sort of supernatural towns or supernatural. You could take these haunted tours. They were all over the place. So we said, what if we constructed a town that it took all of the past history that we know about the show and just sort of upended it? So this town has a history with all of the original monsters and ghosts that you saw in the original series, and they've figured out a way to monetize it. So, because part of the conceit of the show, if you really look at it, is that adults cannot be trusted. That was like a theme that we wanted to impart. And so we created the idea of this town that's completely run on, supernatural tourism. And every one of the kids' parents are involved in some way. And the economy of this town is all based on it. And the only thing screwing it up for everybody is these 4 kids and their dog who keep disproving that these things are actually supernatural, which is driving tourism away. So the town hated the kids. They hated them. They were continually being arrested for sticking their nose in places that they weren't to go, but they just couldn't stop them. So that became the conceit of the show. And then we said, but then so why do they keep going? Why do they just keep going even when they're being told not to do it? And then that was when we created the idea of there was a prior Mystery Incorporated that had vanished, and Daphne finds that locket in the very first episode, and that opens it up. And then we started layering the story, with whatchamacallit, Dynamite. Why can't I remember her first name?
Angel.
Angel Dynamite. Thank you. Angel Dynamite. Which that we would make her Angel Dynamite and Mr. E, and all of these were all of these old members of the team. Although you don't find that out till later. And they were all still circling Crystal Cove because they were all still looking for the treasure, and that treasure being the planispheric disc. So that would become our big story that we would tell throughout the season and then into the second season. And then in the second season, Mike Ryan, my friend Mike Ryan, came on the show as a story editor, because the first season was pretty much written by Tony and I, even though we hired other writers to come in and write them. And the way we would function was we would go to lunch and go, all right, this is the idea. And we would start just bouncing ideas back and forth. And while we would do that, Tony would sketch whatever he wanted the monster to be or what he was thinking in his head, and I would just pepper him with questions, and we would bat him back and forth until after a couple of lunches we had the outline of a story, and I would go off and write it, and then either I would write the episode or give the outline to a writer to do. But it was just us for the first season because that was the way Warner Brothers works. So we didn't have a staff or anything. And then the second season, because I was also working on Batman at that time, we brought in Tony. And so the second season was created by Tony and myself and Mike Ryan, literally in late nights in Mike's office, just pretty much just getting drunk and just coming up with our crazy notions that we wanted to do. And Mike was fun because Mike really brought in the whole Nibiru aspect of the whole thing because he was obsessed with that stuff. So we took what Tony and I had been doing, and then we just layered in the Nibiru stuff, which we had been flirting with ideas about it in the first season with The Dog Dies and all that stuff. And then it really came to fruition in the second season when Mike came aboard because he had all this information about, the lining up of the planets, and because that's all based on real stuff, or real, conspiracy theory stuff. But so Mike was an integral part of the show in the second season in terms of pushing us in that direction. And, that's why, and we, then part of the other fun of the show was the fact that we would put all these references, movie references and stuff. Like there's an entire episode that's devoted to Werner Herzog. There's an entire episode devoted to the one with Harlan Ellison is all devoted to Lovecraft and stuff. So we had, so we were able, with that format, we were able to explore pretty much anything we wanted to do. I don't even know if that answers your original question because I can't remember what your original question was.
I don't remember either. And when you're working on an overarching story like that, obviously you mentioned that the Nibiru stuff came in later, but how much did you know going into an episode? Like, did you have a huge timeline of when things would get revealed?
Yeah. We had a board. I have pictures of it somewhere. Oh no, we had it all it was all mapped out. We had two wall-sized cork boards. So it basically filled 2 walls of my office with note cards that mapped the entire thing out. No, it was all planned. I mean, obviously, new things would come up here and there that we would add in additionally, but it was pretty much all, like, we always knew that the show was going to be a prequel, so we knew what we were working towards. We always knew that it was the planispheric disk was always going to lead us to this sort of ancient evil that lived within the city. There's in one of the episodes or later episodes when they talk about it, the town that fell into the sea, that's all based on a real town. And a lot of the stuff was based on like weird lore that we had heard too. So, but no, to answer your question, we had mapped, the only thing that was not mapped out, and it literally came from the fans, was, I think the third episode, whatever the Gatorsburg episode was, our art director, Dan Kroll, who's a fantastic guy and really, really created the look of the show. Dan put a gag in one of the backgrounds of the neon sign on the hotel where they stay, where several of the words go out on the sign and it spells out "The Dog Dies." And we did it as a gag. It was just a gag, and then we started to notice that on the blogs and stuff that people were really getting into that. They created all these conspiracy theories about, what does that mean? Are they setting up that Scooby's going to die? Blah, 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 blah. So there were tons of these theories, and we thought, oh, we have to capitalize on this somehow. So that theory of the dog dies, we worked it into the whole notion of that the entity living beneath the of Crystal Cove, in order to become corporeal, needed an animal host. And that to us was our explanation for it needed a particular type of talking animal host, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it's but we were like, we're never going to explain why Scooby can talk. We didn't want to get into the weeds on that. But I said, wouldn't it be cool if the entity couldn't become physical unless it took over a host body? And what if that host body ultimately was supposed to be Scooby's? And so that was what led to the creation of all the different teams that all had different animals in them. So the original team of, with Professor Pericles, and then if you go in the second season, we introduced all the other teams that also had animals, and the idea was, and it was kind of it was what we came up with, was that the entity had been searching for centuries for an animal to take over, and every time it had failed. Something had always happened. The animal wasn't worthy, or something's got screwed up. Like there's the one with the I think the monks and the pig or whatever, and that one got screwed up. And there's the steampunky ones that had the chimp that got screwed up. But then finally with Scooby was the one that Nibiru would actually be able to take over. And and the concept of Nibiru is it's, even though Nibiru is taken from a different thing, it was a very Lovecraftian concept. It was the idea of the elder gods coming down and, possessing some sort of creature to take over the world, which is pretty much what happens at the end of the series with Professor Pericles. So that was really that was really the only thing that wasn't pre-planned, but came out by the third episode. We had sort of figured out how we were going to do that. But it was really fun to see the fans create an idea in their heads of a conspiracy, and then we just took that idea and ran with it. So I like that kind of thing, because it's when people can get involved in a show to the extent that they're like, oh, I wonder if this means that and this means that. I love to like validate some of those feelings, because they were pretty close to figuring out where we were going with it, and then they just took it one step further, and we really liked that one step further, so we just decided to run with it when we heard the whole thing about the dog dies, and it became a very integral part of the entire series. So thank you, fans. Yes, so there you go.
Just to delve a little bit deeper into the timeline, did you, when you were naming the town, did you have that Spanish conquistador story in mind already?
Yeah. Because I think it's yes, we did. Because that story of the conquistadors and all that stuff was based on something that really happened. I forget where the town was, but there was I think it happened in the 17th century. I think there was a town that literally everybody disappeared, and I think it was a coastal town. I don't know if that's where we got the name. I don't remember how the name of Crystal Cove came to be. It was always meant, we were basing it on what the original materials for the show, which had La Jolla pretty much, I think, as the town. So we wanted to create a La Jolla type town in Crystal Cove. I don't know who came up with the name Crystal Cove, but that's what we came up with. But yeah, that conquistador story, that was always there. That was always part of the narrative of that the town itself had been built over some sort of ancient thing that had killed numerous times. Like the town disappeared essentially because of Nibiru, because of the evil, and a lot of other stuff had happened because of the evil. And the show itself was just the latest iteration of the evil trying to rise up and take control of an animal. So yeah, it was always there.
And was the planispheric disc space based on something real as well, or was that something that you had created?
No, the planispheric disc was something that Tony and I came up with. I don't remember. We wanted to come up with, this sort of intricate puzzle treasury kind of thing that that when you put it together in the correct way, it would reveal things to you. I don't know where that idea came from, but it was very much of a sort of, Indiana Jones, Da Vinci Code sort of kind of thing, where some sort of ancient artifact that if you could put the pieces together, I mean, it was partially for plot reasons too, that we would We wanted a disc that could break apart so that there'd be multiple episodes where you were trying to find it. And then once you did find it, we had to sort of figure out how, once you had to move it into a certain position, it would show you clues or coordinates and stuff like that. Like I was telling somebody the other day, we hid a lot of Easter eggs in that show. And one of them that we hid was when the planispheric disk comes together and gives the longitude and latitude of where they're supposed to go. That longitude and latitude is actually the coordinates of Sam Register's office on the Warner Brothers lot. And we were always hoping that somebody would figure that out. I don't think anybody ever did. But we did that. We just kept thinking, we were like, what are we going to do if somebody actually tries to pinpoint this and find Sam's office? And we're like, who knows? We probably won't be working here when that happens. But and that was the truth. But there was a lot of stuff in there. Like I think the show Lost was still on the air when we were making that show. And if you were a fan of Lost, you know that there was this whole like number sequence that they used to use. That was sort of a red herring on that show. And we did the same thing. It's in several episodes where they find all these numbers, and they're all like, what the fuck are these numbers? And those numbers are the exact numbers from Lost. So we buried stuff like that all over the place, especially like in the Chargar Gothicon episode, the Lovecraft takeoff. There's stuff all through there that we hid, and that was fun for us. I was telling somebody the other day, one of the funnest things for me was, I said that I already told you that our executive in England had quit or vanished, anyways, and so all we had left that was giving us notes was the broadcast standards and practice guy. Now, traditionally, those guys are the worst because they're there to essentially catch anything that you might have done that could be offensive or get the studio in trouble or whatnot. But the guy we had in England was a big sci-fi horror fan, and so he got a kick out of finding all the clues and all the things that we would hide in episodes that were references to movies or science fiction stories or other things. And so every script that I would turn in, when he would give us back his notes, part of his notes were a listing of all of the things that he found in the script. And he would always quiz us at the end, like, did I get them all? Did I find them all? And we were like, okay, you got them all in this episode. But then some episodes he wouldn't get them all, and he would be so disappointed that he missed a couple. But that became sort of a game with us over the course of the series. And he became a big fan of the show, but it was just so fun to see what we could slip in there that would stump him, because he was pretty good. He would usually find everything. But again, that was another wrinkle to that show that just made it really enjoyable for all of us, is that, I think everybody from top to bottom on the show we were all big fans of the franchise, but we were all also big sci-fi and horror fans too. And so, everybody kind of got to do a lot of like, well, I've always wanted to do this and stick this in something. So that show allowed us to do that. And that was why I think people had a really good time working on it. So, because we had a very good time working on that show. It was sometimes shows are really difficult and awful and unpleasant, but not that one. That one, despite the fact that it was a very small crew, we all had a very good time working on it.
With the darkness of the show and the overarching kind of sci-fi story, was it originally supposed to be marketed towards children, or was that kind of ambiguous?
Such an interesting question. So the show originally was, yes, it was supposed to be marketed to older kids, but the show itself was supposed to be scary. That was probably the only main thing that Sam told me in the beginning was they really wanted it to be scary. They wanted a legitimately scary Scooby-Doo show. And so we gave them that. And in fact, one of the episodes, the spookified children episode where all the children rebel against the parents in the town, Cartoon Network actually kicked it back to us for being too scary. They said, you got to change this. It's too scary. And we're like, really? Because no one thought you could make a Scooby-Doo episode actually legitimately scary, but we did. And so we had to go back and trim some stuff and change music in a particular sequence because apparently it was freaking people out too much. So the show itself was originally supposed to be a truly scary show for kids. And then and then it became too scary, and they made us tone it down. But no, it was always meant for kids. But part of what I've always liked doing, and I know Tony does too, with these shows is not just to make them for kids. That show, Mystery Incorporated, was designed for, yes, if you're a child, you're going to be entertained by it. But it's also designed for parents or people in their 20s or whatnot to be watching the show and enjoy it as well. Because I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. I have 2 daughters. And I cannot tell you how excited I get when I get to sit down and watch a show with them that I actually enjoy watching, because the majority of them make me want to, gouge my eyes out with large knives, because they're just so boring and so like blah, it's the same thing and da da da. So whenever they find a show that I can get into too, it's like, yep, that's the show we're going to watch. So that was our goal with Mystery Incorporated, was we're going to make a show that the parents would like as much as the kids. And I think we succeeded, because the majority of the fans are not kids. The majority of the fans are actually the parents of the kids who started watching the show. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are to this day are like, I was binge watching it with my kid, and oh my God, blah 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 blah. And the parents are the ones I hear the most from. So that's great. That's, to me, that's the goal of any good animated show, is and I think that's why movies from Pixar work so well, and some Disney stuff and and DreamWorks, is that they appeal to adults and kids. They don't just appeal to kids. And so it's to me what you should be striving for. A lot of shows don't, but Mystery Incorporated certainly did.
Is it difficult to get into the mindset of writing a show that appeals to both generations?
No, not really. And not for me, at least. There are certain things that you can't do in kids animation, and as long as you avoid those things, you can pretty much, I feel you can tell virtually any story you want. I mean, you can't, the big no-nos, sexuality, no, nothing sexual, not even real implied sexual, that stay away from that. Stay away from swearing or derogatory, words or anything like that. General mean, that super like abusively mean stuff, obviously you stay away from. But those, barring all of that, it's a pretty wide open field. So when we sit down, or when I sit down to write these things, I don't write them for kids. I'm writing them basically the story that I would want to see. You have to have, obviously, you have to be a bit of a child yourself, of which no one would say that I wasn't. So there's definitely that aspect of my personality, which I think helps. But no, you don't. I don't. At least when I've talked to people about writing for animation, I always say don't think write for kids, because you're hamstringing yourself. Basically, you're going to stop yourself from going to places that might be really entertaining if you think that, oh, a kid wouldn't like that. One of my biggest pet peeves when working with studios is when I'll throw a word into a script and I'll get a note back. A child's not going to understand that word. And my response is always the same. It's like, so what? So he asked his parents what that word means, and oh, look at that, he just learned a new word. I go, what's wrong with that? Why are we dumbing down these shows for kids, making them stupider? It doesn't make any sense to me. I grew up watching the cartoons I grew up with, which, like Looney Tunes and other Saturday morning cartoons. Some of them were terrible, but some of them were relatively sophisticated. And I would have to ask my parents, like, what does that mean, or what's going on there? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so to me, if you continually dumb down these shows, and trust me, there is, it's not as bad as it used to be, but there's definitely, a section of the children's animation community which feels that everything should be non-threatening. There should be no words that people don't understand. No one should be offended. No one, all jokes should be, there should be a tinge of kindness to them, and there should be no conflict. And it's kind of like, ugh, I don't want to do that. It sucks. So anyways, but to answer your question, I never start writing something with the intention of it being for kids. I write something for my own, pretty much for my own enjoyment. Like, I think this is good. I like this. It doesn't step on any of the rules that you kind of have to follow in terms of, like I said, the sexuality and the swearing and stuff like that. As long as I'm not doing that, to me, everything is fair game. So if I put a big word in there or political every now and then we'll slip in some political subject matter, or we're telling a emotional story that maybe you normally wouldn't see in a kid's cartoon. So what? You know what? So what? I think people don't give kids enough credit. This show Scooby was designed, Mystery Corps was designed for kids, I think 7 up, and having daughters that are 9 and almost 6, they can handle it. The only thing I would say about Scooby is it might be a little scary for some kids. But subject matter wise, it's fine. I do think if some kids are susceptible to being scared really easily, like my older daughter is, she can't watch this. She doesn't watch the show. She can't watch it because it's too scary for her. She will someday. But my younger daughter has absolutely no problem with it. So that part sort of depends on the kid. But in terms of subject matter, I don't think anything should be off limits except the sexual stuff.
For you personally, was it at all difficult to keep the darker tone while also, inserting comedy and the lightheartedness of the Scooby franchise in your writing?
No, it was no, not at all. Because first and foremost, I love horror movies. I'm a huge horror movie fan. I've written horror movies. I watch horror movies constantly. So no, it didn't at all. It's stuff that I write a lot of times just comes out humorous anyways. And writing something scary was just, I loved it. I would love if I could just continually work on shows where I got to do horror and comedy at the same time. Fantastic. But I have yet to be able to do another show like that. But I dream of doing another show like that someday because it was one of my favorite working experiences to do that. The nice thing now with animation is that because of Netflix and other shows and other places like Amazon, they're finally getting into doing like true adult animation that isn't reliant on like it's not just a sitcom. That's actually an adult drama or adult horror animated show. And they've had some success on Netflix with them with like Castlevania and things like that. So I'm hoping that we're going to continue to do that to the point where we actually get to do an actual animated horror thing, because I think it would be great. But to answer to finally answer that question, no, not whatsoever. It was easy. It was a piece of cake for me because it's the exact kind of stuff I love to do.
As producer, head writer in an overarching show and, bringing the odd freelance writer on, how do you make sure that all the characters seem consistent?
Rewriting, really. It's really that. It's just the shows, animated shows, or any show for that matter, it goes through a sort of metamorphosis process, which you just kind of you have to kind of let it just take its course. And it starts with, when you write the pilot and write the voices, that's the first step. And then the second step is what the actors are going to bring to it. One of the interesting things that happened on Mystery Incorporated was we had to, Frank Welker, who was the voice of Fred and also the voice of Scooby, Frank had been on the show since 1968. So Frank was sort of he was the final old guard that we had to get past in terms of whether he was going to go for how we were doing this particular show. And so at the very first record, he read the script and started doing Fred how he thought we wanted Fred to be done. And we said, no, Frank, we don't want you to change anything. We want you to do that same voice, the same attitude, the same inflection, all of it. We wrote the character with your voice in mind. We just wrote him differently. But he should sound just like Fred. Because, Fred in our version of Mystery Incorporated, Fred is slightly on the spectrum. He's a little bit Asperger's-y. and which is, with his obsession with traps and his inability to sort of read human emotions properly and everything. So again, we never said this in the series, but this was what was in our minds. So, but the point I was going to make was, when you write these shows and then it goes to the actors then bring a whole new element to it. And if you're paying attention, what you do is you listen to the way they're reading the dialogue, and then you go back and you rewrite the dialogue. So to answer your question, if I get a script in and the dialogue, I can't hear the actual actors' voices in the dialogue that I'm reading, I go through and I adjust the dialogue. That's part of the job, though. Part of the job of being either the head writer or the story editor or whatnot is to make sure that all of the scripts sound like they're coming from the same show. The tricky part is not to just completely step on the voice of the writer who wrote those scripts. The sweet spot is to be able to let the writer's voice be heard, but still make it feel like it's all part of the same show. If you don't do that, you end up with a very disjointed series where one episode seems like the show and then other episodes don't seem anything like the show. So it's just rewriting, going through and just putting, as they would say, putting everything on model, as they would say.
And speaking of trying to get Frank Welker on board with the way you were doing the show, how did you get Casey Kasem on to do Shaggy's dad?
Okay, so Casey had, obviously had been doing Shaggy for a long time. By the time we did the show, Casey was not in great health. So we knew that he wasn't going to be able to play Shaggy. And I don't even think he wanted to play Shaggy at that point, because he was pretty, he had about, you could get maybe a good half hour out of Casey, and then he would just get too weak. So we came up with the idea of making him Shaggy's father to sort of continue all of that, continue the unity for it. But in terms of getting him, it was easy. He wanted to be part of it. And he was more than, because it had been a while since he had been doing it. Matt Lillard had taken over the role for a while. And he was, Matt had sort of become the character, and I think Casey was fine with that. But Casey also knew his own health wouldn't allow him to be as involved as he had been before. So that was why we created the role of Shaggy's father, and gave it to Casey, because it was sort of our way of paying homage to him and getting his involvement. And we were very fortunate that we did, because he passed away, I think, during the making, while we were doing that show, or maybe just after we did it. So we were all very excited and happy that we got to put him in there and got to use him at the very end.
And when you have actors that have been doing the role for so long, did you ever get any pushback on, what's maybe fits their character or not?
We did. It was interesting. The only one we got real pushback from in the beginning was Mindy Cohn, who was playing Velma, because, like I said at the very top of this thing, Mindy also did not know what we were doing with the character. We purposely kept her in the dark. So when she read the character initially, she didn't understand why the character was acting the way she was acting. And that was exactly what we wanted her to feel, because that was what Velma was going through. But it made her uncomfortable with some of the dialogue that she was saying. And so we had to sort of talk her through it and explain that she just had to trust us, and there was a reason for this, and we were going somewhere with this. And she did. And she was great, but in the very beginning, I think the first couple of episodes, she just didn't understand why we were making Velma act the way Velma was acting. And we sat her down and just sort of had to have a talk with her and just kind of go, we get it, we think you're brilliant, and we love what you're doing. Just trust us. There's a reason that she's acting like this, and it will all become clear later on. And then once she trusted us, everything was awesome, But that was the only real issue we had with one of the main actors. The only other time we had trouble with an actor on that show was when we did the Twin Peaks episode, when we brought in the little person who had played the dancing man, or whatever they call him on Twin Peaks, in the little red suit. I don't think he really dug it. I don't think he was particularly happy to be there. So he was not happy when he was there, and he was supposed to come back in the final episode, and just he didn't refuse to do it, but he quoted us a price that was just so exorbitantly expensive that we were like, we can't do it. So that was why we ended up getting Harlan Ellison again, bringing Harlan back for the very last episode, because we couldn't get the little person from whatchamacallit from Twin Peaks. He was not having it. He was not into it, basically. But besides him, I think that everybody else we had on the show. I mean, we had George Siegel. We had a lot of pretty decent people. Florence Henderson, who was fantastic, who were really cool. But everybody else was pretty great. We didn't really have any issues. Even Harlan Ellison, who everybody thought was going to be a major pain in the ass. Harlan agreed to do it because he and I were friends, and he was like, "Are you going to pay me?" We're like, "Yeah, of course we're going to pay you." Harlan goes, "I'm in." So he did it, and everybody was really afraid because Harlan has a reputation for being kind of a pain in the ass, but he was awesome. He was great, and he loved it. I have a picture somewhere of we went to, because Harlan he's since passed away, but he was kind of sick then, and he got sick, and I got a frantic call from a friend of mine saying that, "Hey, do you have a copy of Harlan's episode? Because he's not doing well, and they're not sure he's going to make it through the weekend. And and it'd be great if he could see it." And I'm like, "Oh, shit. Okay. Well, let me call the guys." So I called our post place, and they were like, "We could put together a special like dub of it for you." So they did a special dub. I drove up there with my buddy Josh on the weekend. We went to Harlan's house, and we sat there in Harlan's living room with Harlan in his pajamas because he wasn't feeling well. And his wife and myself and my friend Josh, and we all watched it together. And I have pictures of Harlan like a child sitting in front of the TV, like 3 or 4 feet away, with this big smile, just loving it, just enjoying the hell out of it. So that was one of the nicest moments for me on the show, was because he was kind of a idol. Harlan's kind of an idol of mine, and very inspirational to me as a writer. And to see him so, engrossed in it and just so enjoying it, knowing that he was sick and that this had cheered him up and everything. It was just, that was one of the moments that I will always have with me from that show is that moment. And fortunately have a picture of it too.
That's amazing. And working as the producer or showrunner, did you get to handpick episodes that you wanted to write and which ones would go to a different writer?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Any idea that I really wanted. The only episode that I didn't get to write myself that I really wanted to write was the Chargar Gothicon episode, the H.P. Lovecraft, because I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. But my friend Adam Beecham wrote that one. And I think I wrote the outline and then Adam wrote the script. And Adam did a wonderful job. So that's the only episode that if I could go back, I would have probably have tried to write myself, because that's my wheelhouse. But no, all the other episodes I got to, if you look, I think I got to write the pilot. I got to write the end episode. I got to write the first and last episodes of both seasons, or maybe Mike might have written actually the last episode of the second season because I was too busy. But I pretty much got to write all the episodes that I wanted to write, except for the Chargar Gothicon one. If I could have, I would have written every episode, but you just don't have the time with that schedule. So, but yeah, that is the nice thing about being a head writer or the showrunner is, you can cherry pick which episodes you want to write, and then farm out the ones you don't want to write. But most of those episodes I really, really enjoyed. And part of the fun of doing that too is I get to hire my friends or other writers I admire. So that's also nice. I mean, I got to there were a lot of people who worked on that show. In fact, almost everybody who worked on that show was a friend of mine. And like I said, John McCann, who wrote that Troll episode, gave me one of my first jobs. Paul Rugg, who wrote several episodes, also gave me one of my first jobs, and I had known them for a very, very long time. So I was very happy to be able to return the favor. And Adam I mentioned, and Mike, and so it's great when you get to work with friends of yours, and whoever, I think, did Hoffmeyer, I can't remember if my friend Mark Hoffmeyer wrote one too, but anyways, that's one of the nice things about being in that position is you can hire your friends, you can pay your friends back for times that they were kind to you, and you also can pretty much make sure that every really cool episode ends up in your hands. So it's good to be in charge.
And when you're doubling as producer, showrunner, writer, do you find you're more protective of the storylines that you had written yourself?
Yeah, you are. It's not so much the storylines. I'm sometimes I've gotten much better at this over the years, but you can sometimes get a little too precious about dialogue or particular story points, and I did in the past I could be a pain in the ass in terms of when they would want to change something of mine. I'm much better about it now. I don't take it quite so personally, but anyway, so storylines, no, because but you got to understand too is I wrote the outlines for most of those episodes, so the only time I would get protective was not really much from the writers. It was from executives who wanted to change a particular thing that we wanted to do, which I felt very strongly about. There were some gags, and usually that revolved around jokes that I wanted to do. I mean, there was in the Mystery Solvers state finals episode, which was I think the 12th episode in the first season or something, which I wrote, which was designed to be a parody of all the old Hanna-Barbera shows that had sort of ripped off Scooby-Doo. We had some jokes with Speed Buggy that got cut that were just deemed to pushing the line too much. I think it was, and I know they ended up in some version of the show, and I haven't seen it in a long time, so I can't remember which version, but we had where Speed Buggy, they think, drowns, and then they drain the water, and she tries to revive him by giving him mouth to mouth through his exhaust pipe. I think I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they made us change that. And there were particular times we would do gags where they just felt, my favorite one. I think my favorite one was we had in the second season when Scooby-Doo falls in love with Nova, the dog, who doesn't really speak. By the way, for those of you, looking for Easter eggs, Nova is named after the character from Planet of the Apes, the female lead in Planet of the Apes, or one of the female leads that hooks up with Charlton Heston, who doesn't speak. So that's where we got that name, Nova. That's why the dog doesn't speak. But in the first time when she's, if you remember, she gets hospitalized at one point. We had her die at the end of that episode. We had her, in the episode, I think the episode ends with her, she sits up, and that's the first time she actually says Nibiru. And then we had her flatline after that. So yeah, the episode ends with her with her flatlining. And they came back and they're like, "Are you going to kill her?" And we were like, "Well, we might. Yeah, we might." We were thinking about it. They're like, "You can't kill the dog. You can't kill a dog. You can't do that." We're like, all right, we won't kill her. Oh, hold on. They're trying to get it. 1 second. Declining this. Yeah. So that was, I remember that one we had to change, and I wasn't happy about it, but I understood why you couldn't kill the dog. So we did that. We had to, if you're paying very close attention, when we get to the Kriegstoffe bot stuff towards the end of the second season, and Hot Dog Water decides to, distract them while the gang gets away. And then if you listen carefully, you can hear machine gun fire, which pretty much lets us know that Hot Dog Water is gunned down. But we weren't allowed to show any of that, or even when Angel Dynamite drowns, if you'll notice, if you watch the show, all of those things are relatively vague. And we were able to do that, and we convinced them to let us show that, because normally you couldn't kill characters on a show like that. But we convinced them because we knew that everything was going to reset in the end, that they were all going to come back to life. So that was how we got around the network in terms of letting us ostensibly kill off certain characters. But they wouldn't. The compromise was we weren't allowed to ever show it. We had to come up with ways to sort of leave it a little bit ambiguous. So, but for the most part, whenever that would happen, it would just we just come up with a creative way to get around it.
Now that you mentioned the Mystery Solvers Club state finals, how did the idea come about to bring back those old Hanna-Barbera characters?
That was, I think it was, I think it was my idea because when we were going back through the archival material, it was like, I think at some point we were like, my God, all they did for years, Hanna-Barbera, was cannibalize Scooby-Doo. It's the same, because if you look at those shows, they're the same show. You know, Captain Caveman, Funky Phantom, Speed Buggy. They're all basically the same shows, just with a slightly different cast. And so I pitched Tony the idea of, what if we just, as a joke, I said, what if we just did an entire episode that featured all the different versions of Scooby-Doo, the different iterations that Hanna-Barbera had done, and then we make it only about the sidekicks. So all the sidekicks who never really solve the mysteries in any of those shows, suddenly they're forced to solve all the mysteries, and they liked it. So that's how it came about. And then we decided in the second season that we would do the same thing at the same episode. So in both episode 12 of the first season and episode 12 of the second season, we have sort of our standalone Hanna-Barbera episode. So in the second season, it was all about Dynamite and Blue Falcon. And the great part was that Frank Welker had done the voice of Dynamite. And so when we conceived the story, we said, Frank, we want you to do exactly the same voice. Exactly. We want the exact same character, and we're going to juxtapose that against Blue Falcon, who is basically Christian Bale from Batman, which is completely different than what the original was. And then we had and then there was more stuff in there about Johnny Quest. We had a bunch of Johnny Quest stuff in there that we had to trim out. But yeah, it was just, again, we took those two episodes in both seasons and we made those were our homage and our loving card to the old Hanna-Barbera stuff, because we were all such big fans of it. We wanted to sort of reinvent it. We did it again too, slightly in another episode when they discover the underground city or underwater city with the Kriegstoffe bots, the two little kids who live in a giant mechanical whale. Those kids are actually from a real show called, I think it was called Moby Dick, and it was the show that was a show that was around the year before Scooby premiered, and the name of their sea lion in that show was Scooby. And when we saw that, we were like, oh my God, they just literally reused the name. We said, we have to do this episode where these kids show up with a sea lion that's named Scooby, and then the real Scooby gets upset that his name was taken by a sea lion, and da 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 da. And then if you also watch the show carefully, the two boys talk about their fathers. Their fathers are characters from the TV show Sequest. So who we imply, by the way, are gay and live together on a submarine. But again, we never come out and actually say it. They just say that our dads are always gone and they're out at sea. So we had a lot. I mean, we had a lot of fun with stuff like that. I mean, Tony went on and did the Scoob movie, which just came out recently, which I also did a little work on. And the original versions of that movie, I think, had a lot more of the Hanna-Barbera crossover stuff, and then they trimmed it out. But there's a whole world of that stuff that people are not familiar with that we had access to. So we used whatever we could find.
And was the idea of paying homage to older Scooby series and movies the way that the Hex Girls and Vincent Van Gogh were brought back as well?
Yes, absolutely. Hex Girls was a big one. I think that Hex Girls, Tony loved the Hex Girls. So, and I like putting music in episodes. So that was where they came from. And we were somehow, I think we actually even got all the original actresses who played the Hex Girls in the original shows. And then Vincent Van Gogh was just Vincent Van Gogh I loved because it was a character from the original or some of the original early series, and B, I was a huge Vincent Price fan of like the Conqueror Worm and Witchmaster General and all of those, and to be able to do like little parody versions of those movies. And then we also, we got Maurice LaMarche to do it, and he was the voice of the Brain, and he's like a iconic voice actor, and he's fabulous. And I think that was the first time I might have ever worked with Maurice. And so it was just, I love those Vincent Van Gogh stuff. We wanted to do more of them. I would have loved to have done an entire series of Vincent Van Gogh, but that's an example of sort of just a really deep fanboy love of those characters, and so we just had to put them in.
Yeah, I have to say the Vincent Van Gogh episodes are some of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, and again, there was more, and we just had to cut stuff out for time, but God, I had a lot of fun writing those and being very, very silly with those, because the way and also I really love the way that Maurice did that character is this sort of, slightly effeminate, very, high-strung actor. I loved what he did with that. We had so much fun doing that character and doing all that stuff that, like I said, I wish we could have done an entire spin-off series of that character, because I think it would have been a blast.
Definitely. And when you were writing, did you have a favorite character to write for?
Fred. Hands down, Fred was always my favorite character to write for, because I just loved how weird Fred was. I loved that Fred was, in the original series, he didn't have a whole lot to do. He was sort of the good-looking guy who led the group, but personality-wise, he was always a bit flat. And we just sort of made him into this such an oddball, in my opinion, especially like in the second season where he's wandering around town, looking like a hobo trying to find his parents. I loved writing for that character because Fred was so earnest. There was nothing malicious about Fred at all. He was just sort of a good guy who just, human emotions were just not his strong suit. And he viewed the world as just a place to set his traps and to keep things close to him. And like there's multiple episodes where he talks about, there's one episode where he talks about like how when the gang graduates from high school and college, they're all just going to live together in a house and they're always going to be together. and that was just how that was Fred's mind. He saw things in very simplistic terms in many, many ways. And, that kind of character is just really, really fun to write for, because he had the character had such a good heart, and he was so earnest that he never really saw, his own faults or the fact that he was keeping people at arm's length by building traps to capture them. And, and how deeply wounded he was by the fact that he never really knew his real parents and his mother had vanished, and then the betrayal of the mayor and all of that stuff. So he was a very interesting character. I always loved writing for him because I just thought he was an extremely fun, interesting character. And I really liked what Frank did too. So Fred was easily my favorite character to write for.
And having the show all set in the same town, what was it like to be able to play with all of the recurring supporting characters like Sheriff Stone and the two mayors?
Great. It was great. Yeah, the two different mayors. It was great. It was, and it was what I think sets this particular iteration of the show apart from others, is the fact that we did center it in one place. We didn't have them going all over the place. We had a whole supporting cast that was a lot of fun for the kids to play off of. And it was really nice to sort of create that world that hadn't been created before in a franchise that had been around for 40 years. And, it also too played into the, having the town and access to the parents and the sheriff and everybody else. It also played into our central theme of adults cannot be trusted. Kids need to rely upon themselves and not just believe what they're being told, which was one of the themes of the whole show. And they functioned in that way. So it was great. It just basically, it gave us a much bigger canvas to play with. And I think when you have that and you can really explore it, it makes everything you're doing have that much more gravity to it, because it seems real, and this world becomes real to people, and so when things happen in it, it takes on greater meaning to them. So I think to me, it was really important for us to establish Crystal Cove and the people that lived in it in order to make the show really stand on its own. And I can't imagine if we had just done it with them driving around, I don't think we would have been able to nearly do, even come close to doing what we actually did with the show.
And out of the various supporting characters, do you have a favorite or a favorite actor who played that character?
Yes, Professor Pericles was my absolute favorite character, and I loved Udo Kier, who played Professor Pericles. I'd never worked with Udo before, but I knew who he was because, and a lot of people don't know this unless they're film buffs or whatever, but Udo Kier, he's got, he's touched a lot of the movie industry. I mean, he's an icon in Germany. He's like a god. And, he worked with Andy Warhol, and he's like a regular in Lars von Trier's movies. I mean, he was a big deal, but people don't really know him in America as much as they know him in Europe, or they know his face or whatnot. But I remember when we first cast him, we got a little pushback because he is German, and he has a very thick German accent. And so sometimes that would make him a little bit hard to understand, but we were just like, I don't care. He's awesome. And he got really, really into the character, to the point that there was one time I remember, or it actually happened a couple of times, he liked to flap his arms as the parrot, when he was doing his dialogue, and his shirts would make noise in the microphones. So we would have to say, Udo, we can't have you flapping your arms like that because it's making too much noise. And he goes, oh, well, I'll just take my shirt off. And then he would just take his shirt off and do the entire record shirtless. And which we just howled with laughter and thought was amazing. But yeah, he did that. He would do that type of stuff. And he would have these, he told these great stories about Warhol and how he met Warhol and working with Lars von Trier. And he was just a very interesting guy. And so getting to work with somebody like him, and since Professor Pericles had a relatively significant role in the series, we got to know each other quite well. And, he invited me out to his place in Palm Springs. And he's just a very interesting guy from a time in Hollywood and in time in movies, which I, wasn't even born for a lot of it. So to get that knowledge from him and to talk to him for hours was just fantastic. And I have since tried to put Udo in several things, and I get the same pushback, which was like I tried to put him in All Hail King Julian, which is when I left Warner Brothers, the show that I did for DreamWorks, and I originally tried to cast him as a villain in that show, a recurring character, and had to replace him because I didn't win the fight in terms of his accent. They were like, oh, you can't understand him. So that I lost that fight. And I was really bummed. Although the actor that we did get ultimately to play the role was equally as great. But I happen to really like Udo a lot and find him to be a tremendously interesting person. So yeah, he's far, hands down, my favorite character, beyond the main characters, and my favorite, one of my favorite actors to work with on that show. And I also, in little known fact, Tony Cervoni and I have each owned the only two Professor Pericles dolls that were ever made for merchandising. They briefly at one point were going to do a toy line of the show, and they made demo copies of Professor Pericles. And when it was decided to abandon doing that for various reasons, they gave Tony and I each the dolls, and that doll now sits in a place of prominence in a box somewhere in storage. But yeah, but they're great. They're great. They're great. And when I'm destitute and poor, I'll sell it on eBay and hopefully make some money. No, it was. I won't even let my daughters play with it. They've tried to get it out of the box. I'm like, nope, can't touch it. Can't touch Professor Pericles. That is off limits.
Why did they abandon the toy line?
Oh, I don't know. It's always a mystery how they do that stuff to me. I honestly don't know. I think because they felt, well, it's the main characters and we already have toys of them, and it's you have to have, the studio has to be behind doing it, the marketing department has to be behind doing it, and there was just no real urgency to it. The marketing department was kind of like wishy-washy on it. Cartoon Network didn't care about the show, and Warner Brothers, didn't have the pull to just make them do it, so they just didn't, and unfortunately when they don't make the toy for your show, it does hurt the show, because that's where they make a lot of money off those shows, is off the merchandising and the toys. And so I've been in that position many, many times where, why didn't you do more? Well, because they didn't make any toys. If they had made toys, we probably would have done more, but they never did. I think there are a couple of iterations that came out after the fact of our version, but I'm not sure. But certainly never any that were unique to the show, like Professor Pericles. So it's a bummer, but yeah, they didn't do that. I mean, here's a perfect example of it is when we did Batman, which came right after. We went to Mattel, and we stylistically, it was a different looking show, and so they, we thought, oh, this is great. And then we went to Mattel, and they gave us we showed them the designs, and they were like, hey, do you think you guys could do like a motorcycle or a boat and da-da-da-da? That would be great. And we're like, yeah, sure. So we figured out ways to work it on. And then what did they do? They abandoned it completely and released their own toy line of Batman, completely disregarding ours, just their own toy line, which is like, again, you think that we should be helping each other, but they just didn't feel that way about it. And so consequently, that show never got a toy line. It also, like I said, was hated by Cartoon Network, and we only ended up getting one season. But if we'd gotten a toy line based on that show, I guarantee we would have gotten a second season. That's all it would have taken. But Mattel just decided, nope, we have our own version, which seems counterproductive, but whatever. I'm not Mattel. That's what they do.
Out of the episodes that you wrote for the show, do you have a favorite?
Good question. Yeah, it would probably be Mystery Solvers State Finals. That's my favorite of the episodes. I'm really happy with the way the pilot came out, because pilots are never easy, and I think they can, they're tough, and it's even harder nowadays because you kind of got to hook people with your pilot. You don't even get a few episodes to hook them anymore. So I was very, very happy with the way the pilot turned out, but my favorite episode to write and to do was the Mystery Solvers State Finals, because that was the closest to probably my style of writing, which was just satire, and I really enjoyed it. That was easily my favorite. And like I said, I really loved the Lovecraft episode, even though I didn't write that one. Technically, Adam wrote that.
And do you have a favorite monster or villain that appears in the show?
Ooh, another good question. Jesus, now I have to go through all of them. All right, well, it's going to sound strange, but one of my favorite episodes that we did in terms of the monsters, I'm not even sure if it's our best episode, but where the gargantuan, the two gargantuans show up, the red one and the brown one, in the town, and it starts with a woman singing this song in the barge. She's singing the song, "The Words Get Stuck in My Throat," and then the creatures attack, and I believe they eat her, or they damage her in some way. I can't remember. It might even be called War of the Gargantuas. I don't know, but it's directly based on an actual 60s B movie from Japan called War of the Gargantuas. And there's a song in War of the Gargantuas, which is "The Words Get Stuck in My Throat." It's the same song. So we licensed the song from that movie and then recreated it in the show with another somebody else singing it, but used the exact same melody, the exact same lyrics, everything, and even made the band look like the band that was in that movie. And unless you were like a real, monster movie nerd, there's no way you would ever know that. But it tickled us to no end that we had gone to such great lengths to do an homage to a movie that probably nobody even knew, but Tony and I loved it. And so we thought, yes, who cares if nobody's going to know what we're doing? We're just going to do it. So that might be one of my favorite ones because it was directly related to to that old movie which I had loved as a child.
That's awesome.
That nobody, I'm sure, knows. Yeah, but yeah, because I think in reading the fan stuff, I think one or two people picked up on it, but the majority of the people never did. But there was a lot of I can't remember. Oh, and the other I really liked the Sarah, the girl who pulls her face off. I can't remember her name, but she comes back a couple of times. But that villain that pulls her face off in an episode, and I think I wrote that episode too. I really like that one, but I want to say her name was Sarah something or other, but I can't remember.
Alice May, I think.
Alice May, thank you. Yes. Alice May. I really liked Alice May. I think probably because I thought she was genuinely creepy and scary. So that might be why I liked her.
Definitely. And I wanted to talk about the songs that you had worked on for both the In Fear of the Phantom and Art of Darkness.
Yes.
How did those come about?
Well, the Art of Darkness, that one, the Warhol one, was because I think Tony and I were both big fans of the Velvet Underground and Nico. And I think the idea, and again, a lot of these ideas, that one in particular, I think we came up with one while we were drunk and figuring out the show, and thought that it would be super funny to have Scooby in a wig singing like Nico. We just thought that was just a batshit idea. And we were like, yes, let's do that. So that was, I think, how we came about coming up with that. It was just a crazy idea that we thought was really funny. The other one, let's see, I forget how we did. I mean, you're talking about the Hex Girls song, right?
There's the Hex Girls one, and then that ridiculous Fancy Pants song.
Oh, well, I forgot about Fancy Pants. Fancy Pants, yeah, pants without his pants. Again, that was just stupid. I think we just were trying to come up with what would be the stupidest song a boy band could come up with, and I think it was something about taking their pants off. That's my memory of coming up with that one. It was just to make fun of boy bands. I don't remember how we did the ones for the Hex Girls, but I know that the Fancy Pants one, I'm pretty sure had to do with some Marky Mark song or that we saw that we thought was stupid, and decided that we were going to make fun of those. I mean, all of those. Well, one of them I think was the first one, but many of those episodes, yeah, we were drinking pretty heavily late at night, coming up with those ideas, and that sort of seeps its way in there bit by bit.
And what was the process with coming up with lyrics for the kind of Velvet Underground type song?
I listened to the song is based on All Tomorrow's Parties by which Nico sang by the Velvet Underground. And I just listened to the song, and the song's lyrics to me were just the actual song's lyrics are just they're kind of ridiculous in a way. So I said, I'm going to write this song in the vein of this song, All Tomorrow's Parties, but just make it that nothing makes sense. It's just word salad. That was how we came up with it. That was how I came up with the lyrics. Writing things that if you listen to the lyrics, they make no sense. I think, what is this? And what is it? There's if you can hear the elk or whatever. Anyways, the lyrics are just stupid, and they're stupid. And they make no sense, but they're based on All Tomorrow's Parties. And it was our sort of saying like, hey man, the Velvet Underground, they don't make sense. There's nothing, their songs don't make any fucking sense. And we're going to make something that's totally ridiculous in that vein. That's my memory of how that song came to be.
And how did you come to voice various different characters on the show?
Let's see. I don't remember. I mean, I think Tony and I always wanted to put ourselves in it. So that we came up with those two, Ethan and Gary. And then and then I did a farmer too on the show at some point. I don't know. It was a lot of times, if we needed to cast an actor and we didn't already have somebody to do the voice, I would just step in and do it. And since I was SAG, I could do that. Yeah, it's just fun. Quite honestly, it wasn't anything we sort of like set down and went, we're going to play this role, we're going to play this role, except for Ethan and Gary, which were always intended to be Tony and I. That's pretty much you go through a lot of these shows. When you do them, you have a certain number of actors that you're allowed to cast, and that's why you have actors like a Maurice LaMarche or a Greg Griffin or somebody like that who can do multiple, or Jeff Bennett who can do multiple voices, because usually when you hire them for one fee, you get 3 characters or something like that. So but if we had a particular episode where we didn't have that, then one of us could always step in and do it. And so that a lot of times that's what ended up happening, is that's how we end up doing the voice. It'd be like, oh, we don't have anybody to do this voice, and rather than just cast another actor, we would just do it ourselves. And then we'd get paid, and it was great.
And just more generally, why do you think that the darker tone of Mystery Incorporated worked so well?
I don't know. I think, what I think worked, what helped make the show really work, was the fact that it had this overarching story. At the time, in animation, when we made that show, nobody wanted to do that. That was another one of the things that we got a lot of pushback on, was studios and networks at that time did not want to do storylines that continued from episode to episode to episode. And that's partially why we put on chapter headings, so that people would know if the network decided to show something out of order, they would know it. They would see, oh, I was just watching episode 5, but now they're airing episode 7. What happened to episode 6? So because we could never trust Cartoon Network to actually air them in order. But now doing serialized storytelling is very common, because Netflix has made it much more common, because people can binge watch these shows. So anyways, so that's really what I think appealed to people. I do think people liked it because it was a little scarier, but what I really think appealed to people was the fact that there was this storyline that they could tune into every day and sort of track it and follow it. And like I said, we got a ton of pushback, and they didn't really want us to do it. So that was why we compromised by having the continual storyline, but we also had standalone stories in each episode, so that you could watch it out of order if you wanted to. If you just wanted to pay attention to the A story, which was the solving of that week's mystery, great, you could do that. But if you chose to really dig deep and hang in there, you'd be rewarded with a story that went for 52 episodes that hopefully for the viewer had a very satisfying ending. And I honestly think that's what people liked about the show more than anything, because it was the first version of Scooby that did that. And we really spent a lot of time working that story out, and so that it all tracked and all made sense and all the pieces fit together in the end. So to me that's what people liked, I think, even more than the darker tone.
And why do you think that Scooby, which is, just a cartoon about a mystery-solving dog, has held up for over 50 years now?
Well, there's 2 reasons for that. That I have been told this, and that I've viewed, which is that one is, I think kids inherently like scary things, whether they like it, whether they say they do or not. Like even my older daughter, who's afraid of scary things, still likes to watch scary things, even though she knows they're going to scare her. There's just something about it. People are drawn to them because it makes them feel a particular way. It creates an emotional response that kicks off their endorphins, or whatever you want to say. There's something about being scared that it appeals to the lizard brain or whatever in people. It's just, there's something about it. So that's the first thing, I think. And the second thing, I think, of what they did in Scooby that made it so popular is all the monsters turn out to be fake in the end. All of, they're all unmasked and they're turds. So it's very safe. So a kid can watch an episode of Scooby-Doo And at the end of the episode, even though they're scared by the supernatural creature, they find out it's not real. None of it's real. All these monsters are fake. They're just people in masks. And I think that's very reassuring to a kid, because it tells them that there's nothing to be scared of when I go to sleep tonight, because that monster wasn't real. So those two things, I think, are what is created the enduring quality of Scooby-Doo. I know from hearing from fans that one of the things that they really get angry about is when you break the rule of the supernatural rule that all supernatural creatures are fake, which we did, in the end of Mystery Incorporated. And we had a guy, our character designer on the show, who got so angry with me when he read that storyline, because he's like, "You wrecked it. You've wrecked it. You wrecked it. It was great. You were revealing. It was just like the original where we unmasked the villains and it's not true. But now you have a supernatural villain. You wrecked the show." And he was dead serious. He was so angry. And we were like, "I'm sorry. We knew where we were going and we wanted to up the stakes, and this is how we're doing it." But there were some people who got very, very offended by that. I remember there was a lady who was helping care for my oldest daughter when she was born, and she was a massive Scooby-Doo fan. And when she found out that I was doing the new version, she got all excited. And then she watched it, and then she didn't stop talking about it. And I was like, uh-oh. So I said, did you watch the show? She goes, "Yes, I watched it." I said, "I'm guessing you didn't like it." And she goes, "No, I didn't like it at all." And I said, "Well, what happened? Why didn't you like it?" She goes, "It just wasn't my Scooby-Doo. It wasn't my version of Scooby-Doo. Her version was the original version, and that was all you could ever do, and that was the version that she knew from being a child, and nothing was ever going to change." And so even changing any aspects of the show was offensive to her. So, some people were like that, but most people went with it. But I do know that making none of the characters actual supernatural and unmasking them as being human in the end is one of the enduring qualities of that show that people love.
And what do you think it is that drives people crazy when you break that formula?
I think it's just like anything else. It's like with superheroes too. It's people, when fans like a show, they feel very protective of it, especially when it's a show they feel that they've discovered and hasn't gotten its due or whatnot. So it's like anything else. I think they get very, very protective of the show, and they feel, so for Scooby-Doo is a perfect example because it has real diehard fans. And those diehard fans look at themselves as sort of the keepers of the flame. And that means, to them, you aren't fucking with the canon of the show. If this is what was established, this is the way it is. And to me, I get it, and I have absolute respect for fans. But as a creator, it becomes too rigid for me. You can't. To me, it's like I learned my lesson. I learned doing Batman, where I really got a lot. Like everybody was like, "This isn't Batman. Bruce Timm is Bruce Timm's Batman is the only Batman." Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you know what? I think I said this in an interview. I said Bruce Timm's awesome. I know Bruce. He's a great guy, and I think what he did, the Batman the Animated Series, is a fantastic series. But it was 20 years ago, and if you want to watch it, you can find it anywhere. We're not doing that show. We're doing a different, our take on it. So, why would I want to just rehash what Bruce did? I want to put my own stamp on it. And I wish that they could understand that a little bit more. But, they get the idea in their head that this is the show and this is the way it should be. And if you veer from it in any way, I've literally gotten emails that said, "You have ruined my childhood," stuff like that. So, but I do think that the fans, they watch their version of whatever it is, and that's the version, and to them that's the only version, and they feel very protective. And if you mess with that version in any way by doing something different, some people can get very, very vocal about it and very, very angry. But hopefully they'll give it a chance and continue to watch it and realize that it's its own separate thing, and that's okay, that you can have variations of the show. Because if you just keep rehashing the same show over and over and over again, eventually people will stop watching it. You have to continually find ways if you want to keep, profiting off of a particular IPO. You have to find new ways of telling those stories, or that it'll just die. So that's my answer to that.
I think that covers all of the questions that I had written down for you here. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about at all?
No, I think you got everything. I think we talked about everything. We talked about the beginning. We talked about Udo. We talked about Frank and the cast. And no, I don't think so. I think we covered. I think, as far as I can remember, we covered it all. I mean, like I said at the very top, it's been a very, of more than any other show I've worked on, Scooby has been very satisfying because, when we were making it, Tony and I, never felt that it was kind of getting the acknowledgement, or people weren't finding it the way we wanted them to find it. And, it wasn't being received the way we had hoped it would be received. And at the time it was, it bummed us out, but I will always remember us sitting and talking and just kind of going, you know what though, in 5 years, I think people will finally discover this show and really enjoy it. And it happened in less than 5 years. I think it was like 3 years. But it happened when it went up on Netflix. And that has been very satisfying because, we always thought we were making something good, and we as a crew loved it, and we're really proud of it, and super surprised that Cartoon Network didn't feel the same way and kept taking it off and really messing it up and keeping it from being the success that we felt it should be. So when it showed back up on Netflix, and then suddenly we're being bombarded by, praise, and people are putting it on top 10 lists. And I think one list even said it was the best iteration of Scooby-Doo that had ever been done. It was like, oh, okay, so we weren't crazy. We really did make something that people could enjoy. It just took them a while to get there. And so that has been very, very satisfying, because usually you do these things, show ends and you move on to the next thing and you don't really hear about it. I've got tons of shows I've worked on that I've never heard about again. But Mystery Incorporated, it's like, we did this show over 10 years ago. So that's very satisfying that it's somehow maintained this thing that people could go. I mean, just another friend of mine who's a voiceover actress who has a 5-year-old son was just called me out of the blue and said, hey, my son and I have started watching the show together. Oh my God, I love it, blah, blah, blah. That's very, very nice. It's very humbling, but it's just to know that you created something that, outlasted its original time in the sun, and that people continue to discover it and enjoy it, and it holds up. So that to me has been the most satisfying aspect of the show, is that it's enduring legacy of, entertaining people, and, people like you and stuff who continue to find it and really, get into it. Another guy, I mean, there is not a month that doesn't go by that somebody doesn't contact me through Facebook or through a friend and say, hey, I just sort of stumbled on this show, and man, it's really good. Can I ever talk to you about it? And I'm like, sure, of course. But that's very satisfying, when something you work on, touches people this many years later, to the point where they actually reach out, which is a big deal. A lot of people who watch, I've never reached out, I think, to a creator, and I watched tons of television. So it's very humbling, and it's very rewarding when that kind of thing happens. And that's it.
And just before we end, do you have any recent things that you've been working on that you want to promote?
Well, yeah. Let's see. I mean, obviously, if you want to, the last two shows, On Hill King Julian and Kung Fu Panda, Paws of Destiny were the last two shows that I did. Both of one's on Amazon, one's on Netflix. They're great shows. The new show I'm doing right now won't be out for another year, but it's based on a book series called Big Nate, which is a very popular book series in the same vein as Diary of a Wimpy Kid and everything. Totally different than Mystery Incorporated, but very excited about it. Great crew, fantastic group of people. So yeah, I hope you watch. It's for Nickelodeon. So I don't know if it's going to air on Nickelodeon or Netflix, but it'll be out in about a year. And I think people will really dig it. I think they'll really like it. It's not scary like Mystery Incorporated, although we do have several horror episodes, but because I'm working on it, we have to. But I think people will like it. I think people will genuinely enjoy it. It's got very funny. It takes place in a middle school. A lot of music and some really, really fun and art. Stylistically, art wise, we're pushing what we can do. We got our art director is a guy from Pixar, super talented guy named Dave Skelly. We've got some really talented people working on it. So I think people will dig it, and I have high hopes for it.
Awesome.
Yes.
And do you have any social media channels or websites or places where people can follow what you're up to?
No. I should, but I don't. No, I don't have anything like that. I'm sorry. So that one I should, but I don't. I apologize.
No problem.
Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this.
Of course. Thanks so much for chatting with me today, Mitch.
You got it. Thank you very much for reaching out and being a fan of the show and getting the word out there. We all really appreciate it.
And that concludes today's episode. Another huge thank you to Mitch Watson for chatting with me and kicking off the Mystery Incorporated month. For more groovy content, be sure to check at Unmasked SD on Twitter, at Unmasked SD Podcast on Instagram, or at unmaskedsdpodcast.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook under the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo podcast. If you like this episode and want to hear more, also make sure to check those social media channels or the website. Or you can listen to older episodes wherever you like to get your podcast fix. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode in this month's Mystery Incorporated theme, which features writer Roger Eschbacher. Scooby-Doo!